could be the worst way to die.
The death is painful and prolonged.
Instant execution.
He was dead before he hit the floor.
A tool of spies and secret agents.
I was a KGB officer, a military officer. I had to obey orders.
A medieval weapon.
Poison means secret. Bullet, it's impossible for bullet to be secret.
In the present day, in Moscow, in Kiev, even in London, people are being poisoned.
Of course, we see only the top of iceberg.
The new Russian billionaires are the richest men in the world. Men like Roman Abramovich moved to London. Here they can buy what they like, even Chelsea Football Club. But why do they come? They're here because they feel safe. Russia is dangerous. Even the richest man in the country can be arrested and thrown in prison. His crime? To get interested in politics. But London isn't safe either. Every football ground Abramovich visits has its escape route checked. He travels by armored car. His daughters have bodyguards. Boris Berezovsky was one of the first Russian billionaires. He fled to London after falling foul of the government. In 2004, he revealed the chauffeur of a former Soviet president had been hired to kill him. He was to be stabbed in a London magistrate's court with a poisoned ink pen. This time, the killer lost his nerve. But the Russians still have to watch their backs. It's medieval, but the assassin's oldest weapon is in fashion again. Poison. A man feels the first clawing fingers of sickness. Inside his body, a deadly chemical is attacking him cell by cell.
Of course I regret what happened. I was always on the lookout for danger. We got away from bombs and assassins, even a booby-trapped plane. This was the only time we didn't make it.
He is the latest victim of poison. The future president of Ukraine. Poison can be one of the ghastliest ways to die. Dreadful agony, desperate fear. Death can take a few seconds, or the effects can last for years.
From the victim's point of view, a really bad poison is one, first of all, it kills you. But if it kills you in a slow and horrible way, well, you know, that's not very nice.
Ken Alibek spent 8 years as head of the Soviet bioweapons program. Anthrax Alibek, named after him, is the most virulent strain of weaponized anthrax on Earth.
God created the only way to, let me say, to give life. Human beings created millions of ways to take it.
Kiev's calm masks a divided Ukraine, riven by the most bitter presidential contest since it gained independence from the Soviet Union. The surprise front-runner is Viktor Yushchenko. He stands for liberalization, freedom, and democracy. Against him is Viktor Yanukovych, backed by the forces of the old guard, a member of the current government. He's supported very publicly by Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. This isn't a normal election campaign. This is war. Ukraine is convulsed with demonstrations, electoral fraud, even physical violence. Security is paramount. The Yushchenko team has 55 bodyguards, many of them ex-special services. Yevgeny Chervenyenko is in charge. In an atmosphere this tense, he needs bodyguards of his own.
We were fully prepared for poison. You see, an open attack could cause a revolution, and the people in power understood that. But poison, illness, car crashes, they could seem like accidents.
In the dirtiest political campaign in living memory, sometimes the bodyguard has to put his own life on the line.
No food reached Yushchenko untested. If we didn't have time to check it or prepare the food ourselves, I would eat it first.
On September the 5th, Yushchenko himself drops his guard. He's to have dinner with two of his most powerful opponents, the head and deputy head of the security service. Tonight's host is Volodymyr Satsuk, who combines his role as deputy security chief with a lifelong interest in poisons. Yushchenko's known these men all his political life. He's told to come alone. As a sign of good faith, he does. He's met by Satsuk's car and driven to his dacha outside Kiev.
At the meeting, he was on his own, completely unprotected.
At the dacha, with no witnesses and no bodyguards, the four men eat, drink, and talk. The meal starts with salad and cold meats. Then they move on to soup and lobster. Vodka, wine, and beer lubricate proceedings. It's the Ukrainian way. Volodya Aryav has been on the road with Yushchenko throughout the campaign. Victor's wife, Katerina, told him what happened at their apartment that night.
She kissed him on the mouth. She said later there was a metallic taste on his lips. She asked if he'd taken any medicine. He said no, he hadn't taken anything.
They went to bed, and in the morning, Viktor Yushchenko felt violently ill. Poison as a political tool is totally alien in the modern West. But in Russia, they've been poisoning each other since the Middle Ages. Whenever there's a political problem, and there doesn't seem to be any other solution, out comes the poison. And as Stalin himself put it, the man and the problem disappeared. The poster boy for 20th century poisoning is Rasputin. Monk, healer, charlatan, seducer. The Russian nobility was horrified by his influence. Even worse, there were rumors he'd been to bed with almost every woman in the royal family, and half the nobility. A group of aristocrats got together to get rid of Rasputin, and the first thing they tried was poison. They were desperate for the assassination to remain secret. They chose cyanide, the fastest acting poison they knew.
And they prefer medieval source, poison, because they realized that when they gave him poison, he immediately would be died.
Cyanide has always been the poisoner's #1 choice, a pure killing machine. In 30 seconds, it floods the body, strangling every single cell.
They will feel scary, short of oxygen, they will become muzzy, giddy, and they may just short of breath, and then they may just collapse and have a convulsion and die. So it is a very, very frightening poison.
60 years on, the CIA was using cyanide in suicide pills issued to agents, with orders to die rather than to be caught. It's fast and lethal. Tony Mendez was a senior intelligence officer with the CIA. During Vietnam, the last thing he gave one of his agents was a pen filled with cyanide. Captured in Saigon, Tony's man followed orders to the letter.
The fellow, once he was caught, was asked for his pen so he could write his confession, and he bit down on the barrel of the pen and broke the cyanide ampule. He was dead before he hit the floor.
The problem for Rasputin's would-be killers was that they'd put the poison onto some cakes. And Rasputin didn't eat sweets.
He called sweet like garbage. And when somebody presented him chocolate, he immediately represented the chocolate of somebody from his fans. For him it was impossible to eat sweet cakes.
Impatient, one of the assassins took a pistol and shot him. Still, he didn't die. Finally, they bludgeoned him with a dumbbell and threw him into the Neva River. Even the deadliest poison's no use if the research is wrong. In his apartment in Kiev, Viktor Yushchenko wakes. He feels unwell. It seems like indigestion, but it keeps getting worse.
The next day when I saw him, he was feeling bad. He thought it was a cold or something wrong with his back from too much time in the car. He went for a sauna. Then he started vomiting terribly.
By mid-morning, the pain's intense. He feels as sick as he ever has in his life, and it's getting worse. Yushchenko wants to go on with the election campaign, but 48 hours in, his body is letting him down. There's no choice. His bodyguard won't let Yushchenko be admitted to any hospital in Ukraine.
We wouldn't even allow an injection in this country. There have been cases in the past in Ukraine where awkward politicians went into government hospitals and came out feet first.
He has to get Yushchenko to a hospital that's safe, and that means abroad. A private plane leaves at 4. Destination, Vienna.
When we landed, we were met by the doctor. When he saw him, he said to me, "Can you drive fast?" I said, "Yes."
That night, Yushchenko is only 12 hours from death. Michael Zimpfer is the doctor in charge of the case.
Well, the condition was critical. He was in a shock-like state from the abdomen.
5 major organs are close to failure. Volodya is one of the only visitors to see him.
When I entered the ward, I didn't recognize him. He was very swollen, his face like a beetroot. We said hello and I asked how he was feeling. He said that they wouldn't let him die in peace.
The doctors can see his symptoms, but they don't know what's causing them. They try on all sorts of diagnoses for size, and none of them fit.
We thought it's a regular severe attack on the gastrointestinal system, including the internal organs, for example, a virus, or also a simple but severe food poisoning.
They pump Yushchenko full of every drug in their arsenal, fighting to control his symptoms before his organs suffer permanent, fatal damage. His condition's still critical. But politics won't wait. Presidential candidate Viktor Yushchenko ignores his doctor's advice, leaves hospital, and goes back to Ukraine. No one knows what's making him sick. The Viennese doctors suggest food poisoning. In Kiev, suspicions are darker. If he's been deliberately poisoned, no one knows what he's been given. There's cause for suspicion. The old Soviet Union, which included Ukraine, had a rap sheet for poisoning as long as your arm, and the tools for the job. When the communists came to power, poison became official government policy. Edvard Radzinsky is a prominent Russian historian who's written about Stalin and about Rasputin. He thinks secrecy came naturally to the communists, and its effects still run through Russian society and government today.
Poison means secret. Bullet, it's impossible for bullet to be secret.
Right after the revolution, Lenin himself ordered the creation of a laboratory to research new poisons. It was to be known as Lab X. This is the Lubyanka, headquarters of the KGB. Thousands of political prisoners went in. Very few of them came out alive. Just around the corner, linked to the Lubyanka by a secret tunnel, is this unassuming but heavily guarded building. This is Lab X. And it's still working today. Stanley Lekarev's life could be a summary of the history of the Russian Secret Service. After his retirement from active duty as an agent, Stanley became a lecturer at the Secret Service Academy, training the next generation. But his very first job was working at Lab X, at the height of the Cold War. The Soviets wanted to be able to destroy the enemies of the revolution and get away with it. That meant poison. Lab X's job was to find the right toxins.
If you are in the house and you are in the kitchen, it's easier to use poison with meals which you prepare. If he is in the separate room and we have the ventilation, we can send this gas which will poison the lungs. If we have the access to the car of the victim, we put the poison on the wheel of the driver, and he is touching the wheel, and it goes through the skin.
Lab X became the first place to test a huge variety of poisons on death row prisoners, using live human beings as lab rats. It was the cruelest and most advanced toxins lab in the world. The most terrifying experiments took place in a row of 5 cells, called the Chamber Lab. Political prisoners and suspected spies were brought here, through the tunnel. They were administered differing amounts of poison, and then the scientists watched them die. They often had a new set of prisoners delivered every week. Anyone who wasn't dead from poison in 14 days was executed, sometimes testing new explosive bullets. Lab X soon had the perfect poisoner's toolkit, a toxin for every eventuality.
The main goal is to liquidate the enemy of the state.
Cyanide always held on at number 1, but Lab X's top 10 included some terrifying and effective poisons.
Strychnine is a pretty horrific poison. Death is painful and prolonged, going in and out of painful muscle spasms to die of exhaustion, metabolic disturbances, and eventually respiratory failure.
Korea, 1958. During peace talks, the entire North Korean delegation is found dead. For Lab X, it's an exciting chance to track down a new toxin. The murder was carried out with a drug called curare.
Somebody would be paralyzed, collapsed, lying on the ground, incredibly anxious, almost certainly knowing that they're going to die. After a minute or two, their consciousness would cloud, but the fright and the horror as somebody who's got curare poisoning would be massive for that short period of time.
The scientists from Lab X didn't just do research, they got their hands dirty. This is the only known surviving photo of their chief, Grigory Marinovsky, poisoner extraordinaire. It's his work that makes politicians frightened to go to hospital in Ukraine. In the winter of 1946, the head of the Ukrainian Catholic Church was injured in a car crash set up by the KGB. He survived. While he was in hospital convalescing, a doctor came to give him an injection. It was Marinovsky in disguise. The Archbishop was dead in seconds. No one knows what poison was used. The best guess is cyanide. For the men who worked with these poisons, the fear that they too may be victims of unseen killers never goes away. KGB General Oleg Kalugin defected in 1994.
Well, I'm not a type who is easily scared, but as a professional, I'm looking around, I know who I'm dealing with, I try to make sure that people I meet are the right people. As I say, those who are doomed to be hanged will not drown.
Lab X is still in operation, and the fruits of 70 years' research are still being put to use. Viktor Yushchenko returns to Kiev from hospital. He has a hectic schedule of public appearances. His supporters are passionate. The election stands on a knife edge. Yushchenko lasts 10 days. The pain never went away. Now it's unbearable. His bodyguard drags him back to the doctors in Vienna.
He developed severest pain comparable to pain after a car accident or after falling out of a building.
The doctors are still confused by Yushchenko's symptoms. They don't know what to do to help him. The election is slipping away.
It was impossible to ease the pain. He said, "I have to win." I supported him and said, "We don't have the right to lose. There are 47 million people behind us." We held each other by the hand.
For those around Yushchenko, it's torture even to watch his suffering.
I was thinking all the time that my friend was dying. The father of 5 children, who I love. For the first time in my life, I knelt. I never kneel. I knelt down and prayed to God for the whole of Ukraine, that he remained alive. Those terrible days in intensive care will remain with me forever.
But while he's at the hospital, the case takes an unprecedented turn. Viktor Yushchenko has a new symptom.
During the second admission, he had an acute inflammation in his face.
Yushchenko was young and charismatic, a change from the old men who ran Ukraine for generations. Now, almost overnight, he's been transformed into the pockmarked, bloated figure he is today. His skin is covered in lesions and scar tissue. The search for a mystery disease is abandoned. There is no disease which can do all this. There's one answer at the back of every mind. Anywhere else it would seem incredible. In the former Soviet Union, it's perfectly possible. Yushchenko's doctors start to suspect that he's been poisoned. Security has stepped up around the stricken candidate. As a last resort, the doctors go public.
We approached the public and our colleagues from abroad asking for help.
Blood samples are sent to the world's 3 leading toxicology labs. They carry out tests for the 20 commonest poisons. They don't find anything. Yushchenko is not the first leader to be struck down by a mysterious illness. In one of the most ironic accusations in Russian history, Edvard Radzinsky thinks he's identified another victim of poisoning. Stalin himself. Stalin had killed millions, sent more to the Gulag. In the era of purges and show trials, the whole of Russia lived in fear. Now an old man, increasingly paranoid, it looked like he was about to launch one last bloody round of murders. His closest allies thought they were next. Radzinsky believes they struck first. Stalin was spending the night of the 28th of February 1953 at his dacha on the outskirts of Moscow. 50 years later, it's still under heavy security. Radzinsky has tracked down the last surviving guard from that night. The guard explained he was given the order to go to bed. This was unique. Normally, Stalin taunted them for being tired. But the order wasn't given directly by Stalin. It was delivered by the commander of the guard, Colonel Krustalov. The next day, the guard found the dictator lying on the floor in a coma, from which he was never to recover. Radzinsky believes Krustalov poisoned him in the night on KGB orders.
I think that Mr. Krustalov come inside of Stalin room and make this injection. This poison created feeling of illness. Stalin dropped like after stroke.
The conspirators chose a poison that gave them a chance to seize power while Stalin lay in a coma. Officially, he died of a stroke. The KGB chief who masterminded the plot got away with this murder. A year later, he was arrested and shot for the thousands of others he'd been responsible for. Stalin was dead, but the work of Lab X went on. At the height of the Cold War, they found what seemed to be the perfect poison. It was to be at the center of the most famous and bizarre poisoning of all. the Markov case. Georgy Markov was a dead man from the moment an agent accidentally knocked into him on Waterloo Bridge on the 7th of September in 1978. It took him 5 days to die. Markov was working in London as a broadcaster for the BBC, relaying pro-Western material to his communist homeland of Bulgaria. His former friend, the president, didn't like what Markov was revealing. He turned to the Soviet Union for help in ridding himself of this annoyance.
The request was to help Bulgarian security services to assassinate Markov.
Kalugin was given his orders by the head of the KGB.
I was a KGB officer, a military officer. I had to obey orders. Had I not carried them out, I would be shot, poisoned, or put at best in a psychiatric institution.
Kalugin ordered his men to give the Bulgarians what they needed. As Markov crossed Waterloo Bridge, an agent carrying a specially modified umbrella fired a pellet containing poison into Markov's leg. He carried on to his office just at the end of the bridge and went home that night. The next day he came to hospital running a high fever, feeling unwell.
What came across, I think, was that he was extremely frightened and was convinced that he was going to die. I think the first reaction of doctors, if somebody comes in saying, I've been stabbed in my calf and I'm going to die, is, you know, should we call the psychiatrists?
Nick Feiner was the last doctor to see Markov alive.
When I saw him, I remember, I mean, he was dying and he needed to have a wire put in his heart to speed the heart up. And so that was the last thing that any of us could think of doing.
Markov was suffering massive organ failure. 2 days later, he was dead. For the doctors, it was still a mystery what had killed him. They examined his x-rays with a fine tooth comb, looking for any clue.
And the x-ray went up and everybody was just looking and they couldn't see anything. And then the radiologist brought out her magnifying glass and held it up to the x-ray, and suddenly she said, you know, I think there is something there. And we all crowded round the x-ray box, and there we saw this little pellet. And that was the moment, and it still sends a shiver down my neck, when we suddenly realized that something had happened.
Further tests, carried out in total secrecy, showed the holes in the pellet were filled with a substance called ricin. It had never been seen in Britain before.
Unfortunately, there is nothing that you can do for somebody who has taken ricin. The damage is occurring. We've got no antidote.
What ricin does is basically, it's like throwing the main power supply of the body off. It stops every cell from working. Every cell in the body, the cells in your liver, in your heart, in your kidneys, in the brain.
Ricin was almost the perfect poison for an assassin. A slow, natural-seeming death. A poison that left no trace. But for the pellet, they'd have got away with it. The attack on Viktor Yushchenko wasn't clean or sophisticated. It left its mark etched on his face. Photos of Yushchenko are published in newspapers around the world. The difference between before and after is shocking. In London, leading toxicologist John Henry sees the images. He makes the vital link everyone else has missed. He's the first to realize there's only one poison that can produce this precise combination of symptoms.
When I looked at the picture, I thought, this has to be dioxin. There's no other reasonable cause for it.
The hideous facial inflammation occurs because the dioxin collects in the fatty tissues of the sweat glands.
The reasons I made the diagnosis were because there was little acne-like spots all over, and they're even on the ears, which is something that doesn't occur with ordinary common or garden acne.
Overnight, a precious vial of Yushchenko's blood is flown to Amsterdam. Bram Brewer is the world's leading dioxin hunter. His lab's the only place in the world that can detect such minute amounts.
The level of dioxin, of this specific dioxin in Mr. Yushchenko's blood was what we call 100,000 units, and this is about 6,000 times higher than in a normal person. The dioxin found was the most potent dioxin of all the dioxins that we know of.
Brewer had found the proof. Viktor Yushchenko was the victim of poisoning. No one had ever been deliberately poisoned with dioxin before. The experts are baffled.
It's still not clear to me why somebody would use dioxin, because we know that dioxin actually is not a regular poison.
The poison used was an exceptionally pure sample of the most powerful form of dioxin, called TCDD. This is how much Yushchenko had consumed. This much more would almost certainly have been fatal.
The lethal dose is less than 5 milligrams. That is an absolutely tiny amount. That's, you know, a trivial amount, you could almost say. So it's an extremely toxic substance.
The dose he was given resulted in extreme changes in his body chemistry.
It will have damaged the cells in the lining of the gut, and there'll be bleeding almost from top to bottom of the gut. After that, the liver will take a hit, and the pancreas.
Back in Vienna, the doctors at last knew what they were dealing with. They try a radical treatment, surgically implanting a permanent pain-killing drip into his spine, like a 24-hour-a-day epidural.
It's an extreme treatment, yeah.
On the 17th of October, after 6 days in hospital, Yushchenko returns to Ukraine, painkillers pumping around his body. He still faces a tough election battle against an opponent who's prepared to use every dirty trick in the book.
There were 2 weeks left till the election. Not to return meant to lose the campaign. He was in a serious state. His face was disfigured, but we decided to fly. We landed to a rally of 150,000 people. In the plane and on the road to the rally, I held the drip connected to the implanted machine. Before the rally, we switched it off and disconnected it. We had to walk through the crowd, where everyone was blessing and wanting to touch him. Immediately after the rally, the pain relief was switched back on. That's how we survived.
On November the 21st, the final round of the election is held. It's Yushchenko versus Yanukovych, head-to-head. Yushchenko's still on the pain-killing drip. Only the drugs are keeping him going. The results come in overnight. Yushchenko has lost. Immediately after the election in Ukraine, there are accusations of fraud. Yushchenko supporters take to the streets demanding a revote. They camp out in Kiev's Independence Square in the snow. Inside Yushchenko's body, the dioxin is still doing damage. It's 48 days since the poisoning. On November the 30th, the Supreme Court rejects the election result and demands a revote. Everyone wants to know who was behind the poisoning. In Kiev, there's one clear suspect. The host at the dacha, Volodymyr Satsuk, the most ruthless senior officer in the Ukrainian Secret Service, with a known interest in poison.
An old friend of his told me that in his days in military intelligence, Volodymyr Satsuk was very interested in poisons. It was his hobby.
But even if it's proved Satsuk administered the poison, the crucial question is who was behind it. Yushchenko's opponents were supported by Moscow. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB colonel. Many believe the Kremlin actively participated in the poisoning. A recording has emerged which seems to support these suspicions.
2 people, one from Kiev, one from Moscow, talk about the poisoning of Yushchenko. The person from Kiev says that the poisoning was organized by an advisor of Vladimir Putin.
The conversation involves a Kiev official, close to the poison investigation, and a Kremlin bureaucrat. They blame the idea for the poisoning on Gleb Pavlovsky, Putin's top spin doctor.
Алло. Добрый день. Добрый. Многоходовка. Да. Как только Россия скажет, что никакого отношения не имела, есть люди с признательными показаниями. И этим Павловским трапать надо будет довольно далеко.
If true, the recording suggests the orders to poison Yushchenko may have come from the Kremlin itself.
А Павловские что, общались по этому вопросу и могли его отравить? Нет, автор идеи. Автор идеи и организатор. Так сказать, идейный вдохновитель, понимаете, да?
My first reaction was to check whether this conversation was genuine or a fake. I found one of the people on the tape. He confirmed not only the conversation, but also the facts he talks about in the conversation.
Это что, этот мудак выдвигал такую идею? Абсолютно.
The truth may never be known, but many people in Kiev believe this was an international conspiracy. It seems insane. Even in the Soviet Union, poison had gone out of fashion. But it's back. The Yushchenko case isn't a one-off. For modern Moscow, it seems poison is just politics by other means. The countries of the former Soviet Union are being swept by a wave of poisonings. Chechen warlord Omar ibn Khattab was a terrorist to the Russians, a freedom fighter to his supporters. On the 8th of July 2003, he received a letter outlining financial dealings carried out by his organization. After he'd read it, as was his usual security practice, he burned it. The letter was impregnated with poison. Khattab was dead within seconds. The Secret Service claimed responsibility. But it isn't just Chechnya that has seen mysterious deaths. Anna Politkovskaya is a fiercely outspoken journalist, working for one of Moscow's few remaining independent newspapers. Anna's colleague, Yuri Shikachikin, was also a member of parliament. He used his political position to uncover a series of scandals involving the government. It cost him his life. In 2003, he returned from a business trip feeling unwell.
The last time I saw him, he simply felt unwell. He seemed to have some kind of flu. There were still no suspicions.
Yuri was taken to hospital. There was little doctors could do but watch him deteriorate.
When his skin began to fall off, of course all his nerve endings were exposed, and no one can live with that level of pain. He was basically kept going by powerful painkillers.
Yuri spent 10 days in agony.
When he was lying in his coffin at his funeral, he had no skin left and almost no hair. He went from being a vivacious man in his 50s to a 90-year-old.
By the time of the funeral, no one was allowed to get close enough to the body to collect the evidence that might have proved he was poisoned, and who was behind it.
There was never an autopsy. It was not allowed by the authorities, and the relatives were not allowed to even come close to him during the funerals.
In London, John Henry has looked at the evidence to try to identify how Yuri was killed.
My own feeling is it sounds most like radiation sickness, that he was given a very potent radioactive chemical, which could have been easily tasteless and totally unnoticeable.
Most radioactive chemicals can't be absorbed by the body, but Lab X found one that could: thallium.
Many people suspect he was poisoned by the KGB. Radioactive thallium, it would be used in different forms. Tiny pills put in a beverage, and that would be enough.
Radiation sickness is a very, very gruesome illness because it's not absolutely immediate. It's going to take days for death to occur. And during that time, you know that you're a goner. There is absolutely nothing you can do. It's a very nasty death.
Stanley Lekarev is an instructor at the Secret Service Academy in Moscow. His view is that of an insider. He has no problem with Yuri's elimination.
Shikachikin is our citizen, and he's just, do with him whatever you want, and you have no risk.
The most frightening thing about his death is that the people who planned the murder, they didn't just shoot him. They turned him into a monster.
The poisoning was a warning to all journalists. Yuri wasn't the only victim. Anna's been highly outspoken in her work, and she too has been poisoned. She was traveling south to cover the Beslan school siege in 2004. She boarded a plane for Rostov.
The only thing she had during the flight was tea, but the tea was served by the attendant, and as we know, of course, the attendant could be KGB.
Anna felt weak and collapsed. She was rushed to hospital and spent 5 days in and out of consciousness. She still hasn't fully recovered.
Every day I have to struggle with my health in order to be able to work.
Anna finds it impossible to talk directly about what happened to her. She lives in fear of a repeat attempt on her life.
I no longer sniff flowers. I don't eat presents from strangers, especially if they're left for me at reception.
Despite her fears, Anna goes on with her work. She won't let the poisoners win. Viktor Yushchenko doesn't give in. He confronts the poison head-on. He appears during the mass protests without cosmetics, to tell his supporters that his scarred face represents the dirty politics of Ukraine. The first election was snatched out from under his nose. He has another chance on Boxing Day 2004. Second time around, Yushchenko wins. He's sworn in early 2005.
Я, Віктор Ющенко, волею народу обраний президентом України.
An official investigation is underway into the poisoning. One piece of evidence may eventually prove who the culprit was: the dioxin in Yushchenko's own body.
Given a sample of dioxin, a good analyst may well be able to tell where it comes from. This is because there are many structural differences in the same chemical. So, and it's the mix of those slightly different variants that will give you the fingerprint, if you wish, of where it was made.
In Amsterdam, Bram Brewer is trying to find that fingerprint. Matching it with other samples in his library, he'll be able to track it to a specific lab or factory. But his results may never become public. Some believe the Yushchenko camp already know where the dioxin came from. But now Yushchenko's the president of Ukraine. Maintaining a good relationship with Moscow is more important. For toxicologist John Henry, the choice of dioxin makes this the most cunning poisoning he's ever come across.
If he died within 4 or 5 days, nobody on earth would have thought of dioxins. He had a very severe gastroenteritis. They might have thought of a rare bacterial illness. They might have thought of some other type of poison. But I don't think anyone would have thought of dioxin.
The meal at the dacha wasn't enough to stop Yushchenko becoming president. But even if they only meant to put him out of the race, it may kill him in the end.
I would say that giving dioxin to Mr. Yushchenko was a ruthless and brutal decision because there's a certain irreversibility about it. Most people have said he's going to be better in a year or 2 or 3. I think it's a life sentence.
The dioxin will remain in his body for the rest of his life. It may shorten it. There's an increased risk of heart disease and cancer. Yushchenko's skin will never recover. It's a mistake his bodyguard will never make again.
Of course I was furious. It was a mistake to let him go in someone else's car with no security. We broke all our own rules. That was the only time we did it.
Like all poisonings, it sends a potent message of terror to all opponents of the regime.
I think the bullet's out of fashion. The state assassin doesn't consider the bullet makes a big enough impression on our citizens anymore.
This is the 21st century. It's not meant to happen anymore, but it's undeniable. Poison is out there, being used for assassination and terror. We probably don't even know the half of it.
Of course, we see only the top of iceberg. We discuss in press the cases which were flops and didn't achieve the result. And the cases which achieved the result, these excellent operations, they will never come to the open discussion.
So next time you read of some mysterious illness or the sudden death of a Russian politician or billionaire, don't blame the vodka and the shellfish. Blame poison.